So, I am very excited to have gotten this in the post today. And you might be a little bit confused as to what it is, but I will tell you. It is a pirate journal called Yo-Ho. Nice piratey name there. And they collect beautiful theological, political essays by some very interesting people. So I am thrilled that they decided to publish an essay that I wrote about the void, a dear friend of mine, and I entitled my essay Oi, Void. There you go, you can see it in print. Oi, Void by Emily John Garces. And this little book is available to their patrons on Patreon. It is also available on their website, unfold.media, for £10. And I thought I would read it you so that you can also buy it, or so that you can have the content for free. I'm quite closeted about my relationship with the void, so I guess this is my coming out pamphlet. Okay, beautiful little books these. They have lovely little kind of journalistic doodle pages integrated into the books, which I love, and there are some fascinating little books to collect. Right, here I go. Oi, Void. After an uncomfortably long day of feeling I'm being trailed around the house by it, as if by a sullen child on a rainy day with no friends their age to play with, I yield finally and swing round with an oi, void of direct acknowledgement, and sit down to write this. I've spent a lifetime denying that this black vortex has been following me. I became a Christian at the age of 5, and I was told that Jesus was the missing jigsaw piece that would complete my little world. So I grew up trying to bridge shut the chasm at the centre of my being by clenching and contracting all my mental and spiritual muscles. Ice cream van in the background there. In an effort to pull myself together across the internal rift. Nietzsche said, if you gaze long into the abyss gazes also into you. The author Megan Devine says that this Bible verse has always been misunderstood. When the void calls to the void in the voice of your waterfalls, your storms and tempests will not consume me. She says that the words express a longing for connection with the God force in nature. And it makes me wonder, without ever allowing ourselves to accept the existence of such a void, how could the unacknowledged space at the core of us ever truly be able to reach out and connect with such a God force? I wrote this poem 9 years ago on a stormy Scottish night to the accompanying sound of the wind and the waves in the home of my dear American friend Kat, who had lost her husband 3 months previously to a lightning strike on a wooden footbridge spanning the nearby loch. It was an evening where you could feel the erosion of kisses between life and death every time a wave brushed angrily against the shore, retreating only to advance again. These words came out of me near the end of my 11-year marriage to an Argentinian I'd met whilst being an evangelical missionary. I wrote the poem when I was, for the first time in my life, willing to accept that the vast, dark depth hidden inside me was an integral part of who I was. And perhaps acknowledging it was the only way I could reach out in desperation for the mysterious void that inhabited the darkness beyond me. Listening to the sea. Sew me a gown with more shades of blue, and I will wear it. Write me a song that sighs and roars in the same breath, and I will sing it. Compose me a waltz with more oscillations, and I will dance it. Shine a light more alluring than the moon, and I will be drawn to it. Give me a drink that quenches the soul and not the body, and I will drink it. Your metaphors are sand through fingers. You don't know what I feel like from the inside. You can only touch my skin, watch it shudder in the wind, so let me give you goosebumps that grip your memory like barnacles. Let the only thing that you can hold on to be the vastness of ignorance, for you will never understand that I am sea and you are land. A new space was opening up in me. The internal rift was no longer trying to clench itself shut. It was gaping open, like a mouth lost for words, like the great void of empty space that makes a valley beautiful. Being near a great watery expanse helped me to feel all of this properly for the first time. I wonder if that's what the sea does to people. Are those who choose a life on the waves choosing to live in a permanent state of connection with the void itself? Wake up and smile. Hundreds of students and volunteers were invited to sit alone in a lab room with their thoughts. 67% of the men and 25% of the women chose to press a button to shock themselves with electricity rather than to simply sit quietly and think. What is it about our own thoughts that scares us so much? There's a Saturday Night Live sketch called Wake Up and Smile. It features Will Ferrell as a benignly perky daytime TV host whose teleprompter fails. He lives his worst nightmare. When Farrell's character is suddenly unsupervised and left alone to vocalise his thoughts, he says, "I was thinking somebody should get a group together with guns and sweep out those ghettos." He looks deeply and utterly shocked at the words that have come out of his own mouth. The situation deteriorates to the point where he has daubed himself with paint, started a primitive, power-hungry cult, and cut off the head of the weatherman. What secret darkness does our subconscious carry just under the surface of the waves, waiting for the teleprompter to break? And how does a person live, even with a perfectly functioning teleprompter, knowing that there's a chance it could break at any time? How does a person cope with the possibility of such an all-consuming sea monster existing in the depths of our own mind? Jung said, "The psychological rule says that when an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside as fate. That is to say, when the individual remains undivided and does not become conscious of his inner contradictions, the world must perforce act out the conflict and be torn into opposite halves." Easier said than done, surely. And if we let such a thing out of the box, how would we get it in again? How do you intentionally face the version of yourself that hides beneath the teleprompter? Do you open your mouth and start speaking in tongues until your tongue becomes looser and looser and you have developed the supernatural gift of subconscious Tourette's? I was raised in Pentecostal church settings where I'd often fantasise that the Christian teleprompter would break and the congregants would be released into a fit of honesty. "Turn to the brother next to you," the preacher would say. "Tell them what you really think of them." Then the fantasy would carry me away until the chairs were upturned and there was blood everywhere. And people were screaming like Will Ferrell at the end of the sketch. My fantasy would continue until people started to pick up the pieces of themselves and help others up off the floor, slowly limping out of the church together, arm in arm, and smiling softly and openly. Isn't that what life is, after all? An attempt to manage a constant underlying fear that one day our safety procedures will fail us and we will be left publicly exposed, or that we will die and face more pain than is bearable in the process, or that someone we love will die and we will have to watch. The horrors that we are constantly trying to put out of our mind are often seated around the edges of that same mind, looking in and waiting. And even when we refuse to look into that particular void of our deepest fears, we can still, in some part of our being, feel those eyes on us. The question is, what would happen if we met that gaze? Would connecting with those horrible possibilities give them more power or less power over us? In 2005, after several years as a missionary in South America, my evangelical teleprompter started to glitch. I woke from a powerful dream in which I'd witnessed the great stones of my Christian faith crumbling dramatically around me. Here's a poem that I wrote later in memory of the experience. Walls. For 2 decades I sat in churches on sunny days, the world outside further away than the time-locked saints in the stained glass windows. The sun's light fell on me through their tinted halos, and I would stretch out my toes in the borrowed light of transcendence, until one day I dreamt that I heard the earth roaring and I saw the great stones of the temple falling down around me. I was left exposed and cold because the truths that had been my childhood friends had grown old and grey while I had stayed young. And I stood in the same spot for years, staring in shell shock at the broken walls, waiting for it to be rebuilt, because I was told that the glory of the first temple would be nothing compared to the glory of the new. But they never came to understand glory in the way that I now do. I stopped regarding the rubble and noticed I could see the sky bending down to reach me like a hug from otherness in a gown of blue. I stopped looking down in frustration at the empty page I'd come to be and saw instead before me the unbearable beauty of a newborn blanket of snow. Walls are the opposite of bridges. Walls are the arguments you're determined to win. Walls are built to keep you safe. Walls are built to keep you in. Being left open to the elements without the protection of institution was what I feared the most. When it first happened, I hoped it would be temporary, like the uncomfortable experience of living in your own garden for a bit while your house is being rebuilt. No such luck. It seems a true relationship with the void is to be a committed one, where the stars become consistent bedfellows. What then, if we give up all complex animosity entirely and decide to befriend the void instead of ignoring it? How would we do that exactly? How to foster a personal relationship with the void. 1. Talk to it over breakfast. Allow for long, uncomfortable silences, especially if you've been avoiding each other for a while. Don't expect the conversation to make any sense. 2. Sit with your fear of it until you notice the presence of other emotions. Is there now a growing difference between awe and fear? Don't just face it, enter and explore. It is a gaping hole after all, though never enter until the void itself is kind enough to invite you. But don't expect to be invited before you love the most painful parts of yourself as much as you love the easy parts. Keep an open mind and don't assume you know what you are going to find there. Never tell anyone what you see. They will worry about you and you will become a stumbling block to their own relationship with the void. Listen to Leonard Cohen. Watch out for any addictive behaviour such as overindulgence in alcohol, drugs, gambling, phone use, sport or meditation. Obsessive behaviour can arise when we are trying to block out the call of a frustrated void. Take it out to dinner with your friends. If you have a friend who is willing, let it socialise with their void, but not for too long and only when you are mostly sober. Go to bed early so you can spend extra time with it. Late nights can be textbook behaviour for the void avoidant. Like all relationships, it takes work. But unlike other relationships, it doesn't get easier the more work you do. It's possible that it even gets harder. The infinite nature of the void makes it very hard to get to know well. The positive side to this is that it is a relationship that is unlikely to stagnate. Know that your relationship with the void will outlive all other relationships. Understand that this is a connection that will be ongoing. When you meet the love of your life, the void will be there. When you land the perfect job, the void will be there. When you finish a lifelong course of therapy and self-bettering, the void will be there. Total perspective vortex. I grew up on familiar terms with the Total Perspective Vortex. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy was my bedtime reading. This was back in the early 90s when it seemed that Douglas Adams and I were the only people using the internet. We'd exchanged a few emails. The Total Perspective Vortex was used to demonstrate the theory of atomic interactivity, the idea being that if every one of the atoms in the universe is affected by every other atom in the universe, then it could be possible to extract a model of the entire universe using any simple piece of matter as a starting point. Adams imagined a machine that did this using a piece of fairy cake. The fictional creator of the TPV was a man called Trin Tragula, who did so in order to get back at his wife. The machine was built in response to her constant demand that he should get a sense of proportion. When he connected the fairy cake, his wife, and the extrapolated universe, he was horrified to learn that he had destroyed her mind, while simultaneously proving his point. A total sense of perspective isn't actually helpful. Pete Holmes expresses similar mind-blowing thoughts as part of his comedy routines. He talks about freaking out on a plane as he tries to comprehend how the great hunk of metal is staying airborne. He's amazed that the people on the plane are so calm about it. He goes on to say that just like the plane, the planet itself is also hurtling, unprotected through space. Therefore, when we are in a plane, we are not just flying, we are in fact double flying. And the biggest mystery isn't the science itself, it's the fact that people seemingly remain completely unperturbed. Is our precarious place in the universe something that we prefer not to bear in mind, because we would unravel if we did? The universe is big, really big. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy goes on to describe how the total perspective vortex is used as a weapon of torture on the planet Frog Star B. The chosen victim is faced with a model of the universe wherein lies a microscopic dot on a microscopic dot bearing the words "You are here." Apparently the human soul could not possibly handle such minutitude. The only conclusion that I can come to personally is that our place in the universe is best understood as a paradox. In my experience, at times, remembering how small I am can be a complete relief. Even a great big life-altering mistake given this context becomes impossibly small and unimportant. There have been many times when I have looked up into the infinite possibility of the night sky and breathed a deep sigh of relief. The immense problem I was currently wrestling was, in actual comparative fact, very small indeed. There are so many ways to observe the situation that we find ourselves in. We could say, for example, that any one point on the surface of the globe is its centre. The Earth is democratic in the sense that it gives us equal geographic importance. Shortly after losing my partner to suicide, I unexpectedly found myself on tour with the punk poet Dr. John Cooper Clarke. I sat with him on a sofa in a bar one night and implored him to tell me that the universe... motorbikes. That the universe is vast enough for us to be completely unimportant as individuals. I wanted to be able to believe that the pain of my story would fade quickly into nothing and be forgotten. I wanted to be able to believe that the void left by the man I had lost would make no real impact on the eternal stability of everything. The poet turned to me with eyes twinkling like stars from behind his dark glasses and said, "The universe is a backdrop for humanity." They weren't the words I wanted to hear, but I felt some truth in them. The loss deep inside me mirrored and reflected by the loss carried by the universe, the deep pain in me calling out to the deep pain in existence itself. What if we are truthfully small as the total perspective vortex makes us believe ourselves to be, but somehow still loved and elevated to a place of importance by the great magnitude of mystery that surrounds us? Nothing completes us. I've heard the radical theologian Peter Rollins say that the writers of nihilism, Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, Dostoevsky, were not nihilists as such, but that they believed that nihilism was already an event, and that denying it doesn't help anyone. When we have the courage to accept the truth of our predicament, we discover a way of being that has nothingness as part of its structure, coming to the beautiful realization that nothing completes us. I like the thought of nothingness being built into the structure of a life, in the same way biophilic architecture incorporates space, plants and natural shapes, celebrating the way light interacts with carefully placed nothingness. I read once that biophilic design celebrates the creation of places which give us a sense of awe introduced by an experience of slight jeopardy, the sudden opening up of a space, or stepping stones that require extra balance. Could awe be introduced back into our lives in a similar way if elements of nothingness, grief and doubt were built into our lives and minds in the same way that biophilic design tries to reintroduce the spontaneous character of nature to predictable urban landscapes? I wrote a poem in which I tried to express this feeling. Lovers under the night sky. I will hold fiercely to my doubt like a lover returned from a foreign war. We will dance under the stars and ghosts of stars. We will sway and falter and stumble as dark as open and as beautiful as the furthest, most infinitely questioning corner of the night sky. Once the freedom to doubt is returned to you, you will want to never let it go. The fragility of life and temporary nature of even the stars themselves is a deeply wondrous thing. An imperfect, impromptu dance is the only dance which is impossible to repeat. One of the ways that this beautiful nothing completes us is by removing the libidinal investment in the lost object, something Peter Rollins talks about often, freeing us to settle into the enjoyment of not finding what we were looking for, in the knowledge that it wouldn't have completed us even if we had. Once nothing is restored as part of the inner structure of our identity, we are free to stop searching in vain for the objects that we previously thought could have filled this holy void. But how do you, in real life, stop denying that nihilism is already an event? Rollins saying that they are not nihilists as such reminds me of my relationship with pessimism. When I was very young, I read these words by C.S. Lewis and filed them away in my brain. Imagine a set of people all living in the same building. Half of them think it's a hotel. The other half think it's a prison. Those who think it's a hotel might regard it as quite intolerable, and those who thought it was a prison might decide that it was really surprisingly comfortable, so that what seems the ugly doctrine is one that comforts and strengthens you in the end. The people who try to hold an optimistic view of this world would become pessimists. The people who hold a pretty stern view of it become optimistic. Could I therefore describe myself as not being a pessimist as such? Something else could be said about believing you're in a prison. There's a chance of escape, and there's a world in your imagination that is better than the space you're in. And, in Lewis's metaphor, who knows if the door to the building is even locked? Even if it is, your body might be imprisoned, but your mind is free. When your denial of the presence of the void leads you to believe that you're in a hotel, the opposite is true. You believe that this is as good as it gets. You believe that you are where you are because of free will. You tolerate the intolerable and have no dreams of escape. Your body might be free, but your mind is not. Does a failure to embrace the void lead therefore to apathy and social stagnation? I believe that there's something of a mutinous spirit in a pessimistic view that leads to action. The refusal to play a game by its corrupt rules, the decision not to put your hands over your eyes and to hunker down into your duvet pretending you've chosen to be in a shitty hotel when you're in a fucking prison. Indefensible violence aside, pirates are wild people who choose to spend their days riding atop the waves of the void itself. And what does that look like? Who is this human who lives like nihilism is already an event, who has integrated the void to such a degree that it is part of their very being? I witnessed the suicide of someone I loved, and only complete detachment from my own mind or complete commitment to alcohol or drugs could have protected me from the darkness that pressed in from all sides. At that time I read these words by Mary Oliver. Someone I loved once gave me a box full of darkness. It took me years to understand that this too was a gift. So I received it as such. Doing so didn't lessen the pain or dull the grief. I think it may have made me feel it all the more. The experience was akin to standing in the middle of a storm, resisting the temptation to huddle into the ground with my hands over my ears. Throwing off all my clothes, climbing onto a large rock and trying to scream louder than the noise of the wind and the rain, which was, of course, impossible. When the howling darkness joined all its forces and swept in towards me, I stood tall and howled back. If an observer were watching, they wouldn't have been able to separate the two of us. When the void calls to the void in the voice of your waterfalls, your storms and tempests do not consume me. The God force I encountered during this experience was a force of nature, and I was too. Maybe it was that commonality that connected us. I have no way of knowing if the original writer of these words experienced what I experienced when facing my own void. Although the storm kept raging through all my human emotions, deeper in, past the emotions, there was a break in the clouds, and I journeyed into the unknown that is spoken of in Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey, and maybe even referred to as the kingdom of God by people like Jesus. I wrote this poem while standing naked on a rock in the middle of a raging storm. Wild. I'm a wild child, she laughs, wild at heart, wild and free, free at last. Wildness isn't a laughing matter, I tell her, head down, eyebrows furrowed and fierce. Wildness is to be without a home, to face the wind like in a boxing ring and have it hit you to the bone. Wildness is to live among people and always feel alone. Well, maybe I'm not wild then, she says, but I hope that one day I'll be brave enough for all that, dancing around wildfires in the mountains, toying with my prey like a wild cat. Hope? I ask her. You'd hope for that? Wild people don't hope. Hope is too solid a thing, too built up. Hope is a city where people live in apartment blocks, one fabricated dream on top of the other, like cake and filling and icing, all sweet and sticky and nice, perfect to look at like a wedding day, but crumbling when sliced. Wild people don't live in hope. Wildness has no place like that to hang its coat. Longing, though, longing is a thing that wild people do, stretching themselves around a tired moment like a big cat in a zoo. It hurts us, this longing, but it's real and ancient and true. Hope you'll be okay. She's staring now. I have hope for my future. I can hope for yours, too. No, I say, I don't want anything that I don't already have. I have my longing. Its arms of desire don't hold false promises. All wildness is a longing for who you already are. I'm a fish in a tank longing for the sea, but I already have all the water I need, and I carry those oceans inside of me. Why try to be wild? Is a fish behind glass made less part of the ocean? Is a bird in a cage made less part of the sky? I could go on to ask, is a person in a prison made less part of the real world? Does simply knowing of the existence of a vast and unknowable void make it somehow more part of us? Do we become the eyes of the void observing itself? Keston Brewer referred to his punk theologian friend Barry Taylor. Barry appeared in my life too, whilst that same storm was raging, and gave a talk which he titled "The Apocalypse Will Blossom." He spoke about the time in which the musician Lorde wore a poem pinned to her dress in the Grammy Awards. Rejoice, our times are intolerable. Take courage, for the worst is a harbinger of the best. Only dire circumstance can precipitate the overthrow of oppressors. The old and corrupt must be laid to waste before the just can triumph. Contradiction will be heightened. The reckoning will be hastened by the staging of seed disturbances. The apocalypse will blossom. And I painted this in response to it. Oh, look, there's a little picture. It's like reading you guys a bedtime story with pictures. Split in two, the void calling to the void, highlighting the contradiction that the deeper we stare into the oceanic darkness, the more we become aware that it is made up of layer after layer of intense colour. We realise that the apocalypse does not mark the end of a world, it makes straight the paths for a new one. There's a path to follow then, a calling, a tyranny to overthrow. To be honest, talk of all that makes me feel a little tired already. There's a danger with it too, that if we rush headlong into all this action and as a result neglect our personal relationship with the void, I'm not for a second suggesting that we should work on ourselves before going off into the real world to make a difference. Quite the opposite. We could instead simply accept ourselves as we are, voids and all, before trying to overthrow all the external wrongs. If we don't do this, we'll likely just project our lack of self-acceptance onto others and end up making the world accidentally worse as we go around expecting people to put clothes on their void because it makes us uncomfortable. Surrender is a good place to start. Surrender. I want to surrender to life the same way some people surrender to death, to lie back and let it take me, a four-poster bed, a river, a song in my head. I want to surrender to life in the same way some people surrender to death, that person who knows how to make you angry, the enemy you live to fight, a garden weed, a bus ticket, a loosening thread. I want to surrender to life in the way some people surrender to death, to lie down, arms clinging to the ground as if it were my mother, a passing cloud. That shroud on the sunset, that thing you said. I want to surrender to life, the same way some people surrender to death, to give up alarm clocks, wake instead to the smell of imagined coffee, a messy bed, a second-hand dream, an early flower, a first breath. Maybe surrendering to death isn't the only way to be welcomed back into the oceanic darkness of the void. Maybe we can surrender to life, too. Maybe heaven is actually the kingdom of God that Jesus spoke of, and it can be found amongst us amidst our pain and not set apart from it. What would the world look like if everyone was surrendered to the void rather than in denial of it? How would politicians speak to each other if they weren't trying to overcome an exasperated subconscious, or battling to pour positions of power into a gap in their soul as if it were a lucrative, empty plot of real estate rather than a beautiful valley full of intentional mystery? Maybe looking into other people's voids and studying them is a good way to acclimatise yourself to the presence of your own. Good art is full of voids. Here are some that I recommend. My Bed by Tracey Emin. Tracey's unmade bed was exhibited at the Tate Gallery in 1998 after she had remained in it for 4 days without eating or drinking anything but alcohol. The depressive state of being was a black hole of a void coming between the artist and the creation of her art. In a moment of defiant inspiration, the obstacle to the art became the art itself. Leap into the Void by Yves Klein. This photograph was taken in 1960, depicts the artist as he hurls himself off a rooftop into the unresponsive mundanity of an ordinary Parisian street. The moment captures not only a turning towards the void, but a wholehearted, fully committed leap into the midst of it. The details surrounding the creation of the illusion were kept quiet until an exhibition in 2010. But I personally believe that the aim of this piece of art was not to deceive the viewer, but to reveal the deeper truth that Klein carried within himself, his courageous, fully fledged commitment to experience the void completely. 4 minutes, 33 seconds by John Cage. On a Friday in 1952, a pianist named David Tudor stepped onto the stage at Maverick Concert Hall in Woodstock, New York. He sat down at the piano, closed the lid over the waiting keys and clicked a stopwatch. He turned the pages of a silent score and stood twice to open and close the piano lid between movements. 4 minutes and 33 seconds passed before he stood to receive applause. The audience was confused. This was the masterpiece created by the composer John Cage. What they thought was silence because they didn't know how to listen was full of accidental sounds, John Cage remembers. You could hear the wind stirring outside during the first movement. During the second, raindrops began pattering on the roof, and during the third, the people made all kinds of interesting sounds as they talked or walked out. The composer was inspired by a series of white paintings created by Bob Rauschenberg, which he saw as landing strips for light and shadow. When Women Were Birds by Terry Tempest Williams. This book is the author's account of inheriting her mother's journals. It is a stunning exploration of the presence of an absence. 3 shelves of beautifully cloth-bound books, some floral, some paisley, others in solid colours. The spines of each were perfectly aligned against the lip of the shelves. I opened the first journal. It was empty. I opened the second journal. It was empty. I opened the third. It, too, was empty, as was the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, shelf after shelf after shelf. All of my mother's journals were blank. It was my dear friend Kat who gave me this book. It must have brought her comfort after her husband was struck by lightning and she was left with nothing but questions and paths leading to nothingness. Kat died a few short months ago and her memorial was in Oregon, and I missed it. Saying those words hurt so very deeply. Maybe she gave me this book because she knew that the presence of her absence would be unbearable without such a companion to silence, as Williams writes. My mother was a great reader. She left me her journals, and all her journals were blank. I believe she wanted them read. How do I read them now? I am afraid of silence. Silence creates a pathway to peace through pain, the pain of a distracted and frantic mind before it becomes still. And here's a picture of me with my pirate patch on. Unedited, of course, because of course you can't really sail around in a canoe without a pirate patch. Beautifully at the end of this book are some lovely letters from people who have read it. Paul Hargreaves, Andre Radmel, David Benjamin Blower, Vanessa Chamberlain, and who else was in here? Really, really lovely. Bradley Jersak. I'm just going to quickly read you a poem written by someone called Simon to end this reading of my lovely Ovoid essay, courtesy of Yoho Journals. Check out their website, unfold.media. So Simon ended my little book with a poem. Verse 1. Corpo real, empty shell of hollowed out years, crackled a void covering hidden fears, ventricular cavities keeping 4/4 beats, cavernous pupils, dark wells of the deep, this body of gaps, a riddle of holes, why not a vacancy in place of a soul? In death's contemplation, please don't avoid life's absence, just another circuit of the void. Verse 2. Dark side, spinning platter on long play, spindle filling void in vinyl's core, singer wails her pain at gig in sky. If this is entertainment, why do I cry? 50 years of emptiness inside, half a century on my own dark side, another 6 minutes numbed by Floyd, another circuit around life's void. Unspeakable act. These open hands I cup for you, a chalice of psalms. This night I will pour out for you my life as one prayer. In breathing I lay out an image, a play. In ceasing I rest from absurdity's stage. Only absence grants the permanent avoid. So presently, one more circle. Once more I circle the void. Cosmic triangulations, the minute subnuclear particle field is nothing but spaciousness, faking the real. This vastness of nothing at galaxy scale steals breath, emptying bronchial caves. The awful nothingness of all being gives wondrous paradox to all things. Planet-sized brain makes sad android. My total perspective is a speck in the void. Unveiling, and so my unmade bed of life teeters on the brink of my abyss, and so abysmal is the price of meaning in the penumbra of death, yet in death's shadows bravely sail, neath flag of black and crossed bones, for 'tis a jolly rebel's life, and short, with nights of rum and bawdy song, this cry rings out from wind-burned lips, may blossom fill the apocalypse. Thank you for watching. Buy the book, wee little book, and you can read it in like half an hour, as proven by me just now.